Bienvenidos al canal de YouTube de Ediciones Radio. Aquí encontrarás vídeos especializados en cada tema. Si te gusta nuestro contenido, no olvides suscribirte, darle a me gusta y comentar tu experiencia. Gracias por elegirnos en tu camino hacia el éxito.
Recuerda que todos nuestros temarios también están disponibles en formato digital y papel. Para cualquier duda puedes escribirnos a info@edicionesradio.com. Cuerpo de Maestros. Inglés. Volumen 1.
Main ideas. Speak properly, and in as few words as you can, but always plainly, for the end of speech is not ostentation, but to be understood. William Penn. English religious leader and colonist, 1644 to 1718. Introduction. All through the present topic, we are going to deal with the oral language skills and explain how they should be developed for being successful communicatively speaking. Although the teaching of foreign languages has traditionally focused on the teaching of grammar and the development of written skills, written comprehension and expression, with the appearance of the communicative approach, this vision has been changing. The communicative approach was approved by the Council of Europe in 2001, and it integrates the teaching of the four skills: A. Listening, B. Speaking, C. Writing, and D. Reading together. That means in one lesson students should practice all the skills. That does not imply that in some lessons, one of the skills will be predominant. If we start teaching a new topic, the listening and speaking skills will be practiced before the reading and writing skills. For the acquisition of the key competencies, linguistic communication competence and multilingual competence, reflected in Crown Decree 157/2022 of March 1, which establishes the organization and minimum teachings of primary education, Article 9, it is also necessary to practice the four skills. Practicing the four skills is necessary because of the advantages and aspects we describe in the following. Input goes before output. That means that students have to listen to new words before they will be asked to pronounce them, and they will have to read structures before they will be asked to write them. In terms of skills, we can say that listening comes before speaking and reading before writing. Realism. The situations in which we practice the four skills must be connected with our pupils' lives, customs, and experiences. The pupils will not be motivated to participate in situations which refer, for instance, to business meetings. Variety. The topics we present should belong to a great variety of semantic fields, so that the students acquire a wide range of vocabulary and structures. Confidence. The atmosphere in class should be good enough for the students to feel confident to express themselves. They must also feel confident as far as usage of structures and vocabulary are concerned. Classification of the linguistic skills. Linguistic skills can be classified according to means or to the participant's activity. According to means: hollow right pointing triangle oral, speaking, listening. Hollow right pointing triangle written, reading, writing. According to the participant's activity: hollow right pointing triangle productive, speaking, writing. Hollow right pointing triangle receptive, listening, reading. 1. The oral English language. Traditionally, from the educative point of view, oral language was considered less important than written language, because oral language would be acquired automatically by the child. It is not until 1970 that new pedagogic orientations give priority to oral language with the aim to speak well and to be able to listen comprehensively. So, the child's linguistic competence at the moment of schooling will be the basis for progressive perfection of oral expression. This is why Organic Law 3 2020 BO of the 29th of December 2020, henceforth LOMLOE, amending the Organic Law of Education 2 2006, in its preamble, underlines the importance of oral expression, especially in the first academic years. There are a lot of reasons for the importance of oral language. Human language is mainly oral. From the historic point of view, written language is secondary. A child learns to speak before it is sent to school, only then it acquires written language. Within human language, oral language is the daily, vital and permanent means of communication. Great part of human communication is oral. Therefore, oral language has taken root in all statements of effective, social, and intellectual human life. The command of oral language is fundamental for the later acquisition of written language. Mistakes in oral communication, poverty of vocabulary, syntactic mistakes or bad articulation will influence written expression. 1.1 Characteristics of oral language. It is more complex to teach oral language than to teach written language, as we have to add the special difficulties of the oral code to the general ones. Thus, we need a specific methodology and treatment. In oral language, we have to treat phonic and prosodic features of speech, rhythm and intonation, which depend on a complex system of phonation and hearing. The application of written language allows us to plan and organize the communicative act, to take care of different aspects, and to correct the final result. Oral language is produced quickly and automatically, thus the learning process for its application is more complicated. Oral communication is more complex because the interlocutor is directly present, and by listening, accepting, denying, sharing or disagreeing, he has direct influence on the other interlocutor. Thus, oral communication will always be more subjective, as it is full of affective interferences which depend on the speaker and the listener. The efficiency of communication will depend mainly on the transmitter's and receiver's self-confidence and personality, as well as affective features like friendliness, respect or aggressiveness. 1.2 Aspects and development of oral language. According to Linfers, oral language is a complex system that relates sounds to meanings and is made up of three components: the phonological, the semantic, and the syntactic one. The phonological component involves the rules for combining sounds. Speakers of English, for example, know that an English word can end, but not begin with an ng sound. Native speakers are not aware of these rules, but their ability to understand and pronounce English words demonstrates that they do know an enormous number of rules. The semantic component is made up of morphemes, the smallest units of meaning that may be combined with each other to make up words, e.g. book plus s are the two morphemes that make up books, and sentences as Brown described. A dictionary contains the semantic component of a language, but also dictates which words and meanings are important for the speakers of a language. The syntactic component consists of the rules that enable people to combine morphemes into sentences. As soon as a child uses two morphemes together, like in like sweets, it is using a syntactic rule about how to combine morphemes to express oneself meaningfully. In the same way, the rules making up the other components, syntactic rules, become increasingly complex as the child improves speech. From combining two morphemes, The child goes on to combine words with suffixes or inflections, s or ing, e.g. books and playing, and eventually creates questions, statements, commands, etc. It also learns to combine two ideas into one complex sentence, like in I'll give you my ball if you give me sweets. In social situations, speakers of a language use these three components together. Some linguists might add a fourth component, pragmatics, which explains the rules of language use. Pragmatic rules are one part of a person's communicative competence, the ability to speak appropriately in different situations, e.g. informally at home or more formally at work. Young children need to learn the ways of speaking in the kindergarten or at school, where, for instance, teachers often ask rhetorical questions. Learning pragmatic rules is as important as learning the rules of the other components of language, as people are judged depending on what they say and when they say it. The development of oral language is one of the child's most natural and impressive accomplishments. Almost all children learn the rules of their language at an early age through use, and over time, without formal instruction. Human beings are born to speak. They have an innate gift for finding out the rules of the language used in their environment. The environment itself is also a significant factor. Children learn the specific variety of the language, dialect, that the people around them speak. Children do not, however, learn only by imitating the ones who are around them. We know that children work out proper linguistic rules because they use forms that adults never use, such as I seed mum or I see your tooths. Children learn the conventional forms, saw and teeth, as they find out the exceptions to the rules of English syntax. Like learning to walk, learning to talk requires time for development and practice in everyday situations. Constant correction of a child's speech is usually unproductive and demotivating. In conclusion, language occurs through an interaction among people, environment, and the children's own thinking abilities. It is difficult to state the exact moment when children develop these abilities. In general, children say their first words between 12 and 18 months of age. They begin to use complex sentences by the age of 4 to 4.5 years. By the time they start kindergarten, children know most of the basics of their language, so that they are able to communicate easily with someone who speaks as they do, uses their dialect. As with other aspects of development, you cannot predict language acquisition. One child may say its first word at 10 months, another at 20 months. One child may utter complex sentences at 5.5 years, another at 3 years. 2. The complexity of the comprehension of the general meaning in oral interaction, from audition to active and selective listening. The development of understanding is a priority to successfully develop communicative competence. In addition, it is the starting point for developing written skills. It is important to note that speaking and listening skills are presented in specific competencies, reflected in the Crown Decree 157/2022, Annex 2, Foreign Language. These specific competencies refer to the performance that students must be able to display in activities or in situations whose execution requires the basic knowledge of the area, including oral skills. We can highlight 6 specific competencies, all of them directly related to the communicative competence and connected to their respective descriptors of exit profile. They are: 1. To understand the general meaning and specific and predictable information of short and simple texts. 2. To produce simple texts in an understandable and structured way through the use of strategies. 3. To interact with other people using everyday expressions and resorting to various strategies. 4. To mediate in predictable situations, using strategies and knowledge to process and transmit basic and simple information in order to facilitate communication. 5. To recognize and use personal linguistic repertoires between different languages. 6. To appreciate and respect linguistic, cultural, and artistic diversity. In the following, we are going to summarize shortly the most important aspects of methodology as far as oral comprehension is concerned. To do so, it is necessary to distinguish between the intensive and extensive practice of oral comprehension. The aims of intensive practice of oral comprehension are the acquisition of vocabulary, structures, and phonetics. This kind of practice is strictly controlled by the teacher, and it is indispensable to use adapted material. As far as the extensive practice of oral comprehension is concerned, we can state that the student alone discovers the meaning of the oral language he is exposed to. For that reason, there is less control from the teacher's side, and the global meaning is more important than each item. Next, the requirements for the chosen activities are exposed. The material must be recorded beforehand. It is important for the pupils not only to listen to the teacher's pronunciation, but to other native voices too. When choosing the text, conversation, or situation, it is important to keep in mind the topic, functions, and vocabulary to be practiced. The difficulties of the activities should be adapted to the pupil's level. It is necessary to count on a good timing. That means pupils will make the most of listening activities if they have enough time to reach comprehension without feeling stressed. It is important to use adequate visual aids so as to help the pupils to reach oral comprehension. Another important factor is to insist on global meaning, because in everyday life it is also necessary to grasp the general meaning of a conversation or its basic meaning, but not isolated words or expressions. As we have already stated, listening refers to a complex process that allows the learner to understand spoken language. It is considered the most widely used language skill, and usually goes together with the skill of speaking, and in wider terms with the other two skills, reading and writing. Listening does not only refer to language performance, but is also essential for acquiring a second language. When listening, language is processed in real time by employing pacing, encoding, and pausing, which are unique to spoken language. Although listening is a receptive skill, the student is not passive at all. He must pay attention and be concentrated. Listening involves two kinds of processing. Bottom-up processes are those that take in stimuli from the outside world, incoming speech signals, and top-down one processes uptake of information, guided by the listener's prior knowledge and expectations. In most situations, bottom-up and top-down processes work together to ensure the accurate and rapid processing of information. In former teaching techniques, listening was not considered an important skill, as foreign language teaching was mainly based on the written code. Together with the psychological theory of language acquisition, the spoken language became the main source and means for foreign language learning, and the listening skill gained importance. It was then when it became clear that someone learns to understand and speak a foreign language by hearing and imitating native speakers. This idea is reflected in methods like the audiolingual one. Later, when the concept of communicative competence came up, again listening gained importance, as learners are meant to understand how language is used and not how it is structured. The teaching of listening involves the selection of input. This input may be live or recorded, audio, video, or ICT. Besides, listening has to be segmented for the presentation stage. If we want our listening to be effective, we should select the input sources carefully. Design the tasks creatively so that they are well structured. Teach our students effective listening strategies. Integrate listening with the other skills. Students have to be able to understand the main idea of what is said, as well as specific details. They may need to check any predictions they have made and understand the speaker's meaning, emotions, and opinions. They may have to infer relationships between speakers, or identify the context in which the speakers are operating. Students may well have to use several of these skills in the course of a single listening activity. Here are some of the main skills which should be covered in listening activities. Listening for the main idea. Students listen to identify the overall ideas expressed in the whole recording. Listening for details. Students listen for groups of words and phrases at sentence level. Listening for specific information. Students listen for particular information at word level. Predicting. Students try to guess key information contained in the recording before they listen. Inferring meaning. Students listen to identify the difference between what the speaker says and what they actually mean. Identifying emotion. Students listen to identify the mood of certain speakers. Listening for opinions. Students listen to identify the attitude of certain speakers. Inferring relationships. Students listen to identify who the people are in the recording and what the relationship is between them. Recognizing context. Students listen to oral and contextual clues to identify where the conversation takes place, who is speaking, etc. The language learner initially should encounter pre-listening exercises, generally topical questions that serve as advance for the listener. Next come while listening exercises. The student answers questions to make multiple choice responses. After finishing the quiz or whatever task, the exercise will be corrected. Finally, post-listening exercises lead the learner to and through the social interaction phase, suggesting topics for further expansion and discussion, organizing paired dialogues, or recommending group activities for learners. The relationships among the four skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing are complex and intertwined. A focus on and practice in any one skill area contributes to overall movement along the interlanguage continuum, making knowledge available for application to the other skill areas. Oral language development is clearly a key skill for second language learners, but it does not stand alone. Audio-based second language learning activities should also integrate written components and end up in interactive conversation practice as well. Listening to natural speech can intimidate many language learners. Embedding the listening exercise in a context with pre-, while, and post-listening activities, and focusing the listener's attention through activities that help motivate the listener to try to understand, make the listenings more comprehensible. 2.1. Extensive and intensive listening. Extensive listening means that the listener understands a text globally, whereas intensive listening aims at details. Extensive listening involves hollow right-pointing triangle listening to, or being involved in, large amounts of text. Hollow right-pointing triangle using texts which learners can understand quite smoothly. Hollow right-pointing triangle high levels of comprehension. Hollow right-pointing triangle listening without being influenced by preset questions or while listening tasks. Hollow right-pointing triangle listening at or below one's fluent listening ability. Intensive listening involves hollow right-pointing triangle listening for specific information. Hollow right-pointing triangle listening for the exact words of a phrase or expression. Hollow right-pointing triangle listening for details. Hollow right-pointing triangle listening to mimic a text. 2.2 Samples of listening exercises. 1. Podcast. Podcasting is the method of distributing multimedia files, such as audio programs or music videos, over the internet for playback on mobile devices and personal computers. The term podcast, like radio, can mean both the content and the method of delivery. Usually, a podcast features one type of show, with new episodes released either sporadically or at planned intervals such as daily or weekly. In addition, there are podcast networks that feature multiple shows on the same feed. You can find podcast exercises on many websites. 2. Listening for gist. Listening for the gist is a way of top-down listening where the learner tries to understand what is happening, even if he cannot understand every phrase or sentence. The learner is trying to pick up key words, intonation, and other clues so as to make a guess at the meaning. For extensive listening, it is usual to focus on listening for gist. Listening for gist is similar to skimming in the reading skill. 3. Listening for specific information. Looking for specific information does not mean processing every word to find the answer. Rather, it is like the reading skill of scanning. This is where students often get into trouble. They try to catch everything, often taking the time to mentally translate it into their mother tongue. This word-by-word processing leads to slow, tedious understanding. While listening, it is impossible to get every word. It simply takes too long. The key is to get students to focus on what they are listening for. One good way is simply to have them read the task or questions before listening. Possible tasks for this kind of listening practice are hollow right-pointing triangle right answers. Hollow right-pointing triangle fill in a form. Hollow right-pointing triangle number pictures. 4. Listening dictations. Dictations are a good way of improving the listening skill at the same time as students practice spelling. Although dictations are a traditional resource for ESL teaching, their use has some advantages. Hollow right-pointing triangle. The students are active during the exercise because they have to listen intensively and at the same time try to write down what they understand. Hollow right-pointing triangle. The students are active after the exercise if we ask them to correct their classmates' dictation or to carry out a follow-up task to check the comprehension of the dictation. Hollow right-pointing triangle dictation leads to oral communicative activities if we propose them after the task. The before-mentioned comprehension questions can be carried out orally, for instance. Hollow right-pointing triangle dictation copes with mixed ability groups. The only difference will be that slower learners will make more mistakes or need more time. Hollow right-pointing triangle dictation deals with large groups. That means if there are many pupils in our class, by using dictations, we can practice listening with every student at the same time. Hollow right pointing triangle dictation will often calm groups. After cooperative or TPR exercises, pupils are often too loud and nervous, and then dictations are a good way of coming back to a normal classroom situation. To conclude, we are going to explain ways of preparing or adjusting listening tasks for the pupils so as to get the most of them. The input language of the activity should be simple or little complex. For that, the teacher should 1. Slow his/her speech. 2. Use longer pauses. 3. Repeat familiar information. 4. Clearly signal shifts or changes in the text by changing intonation or using discourse markers. 5. Paraphrase unfamiliar vocabulary or use visual aids to explain it. Pre-listening activities that give a useful preview of the content and procedures in the activity should be used. The teacher should 1. Introduce difficult new vocabulary, structures in advance. 2. State the purpose or main idea clearly. 3. Provide some questions in advance. 4. Organize a warm-up discussion or give an explanation that relates to the topic. It is a good idea to use visual support for the listening activity, for example. 1. Maps. 2. Graphs. 3. Illustrations. 4. Photographs. 5. Charts. 6. Other means of non-verbal communication. The steps of the activity should be broken down in order to provide the aims step by step. 1. Pupils may listen several times, each time with a different aim or objective. 2. The teacher will interrupt just after or before essential information. The amount of oral or written production required should be decreased. The teacher will 1. Admit non-verbal responses. 2. Limit written responses by accepting yes/no answers, true/false statements. 3. Use tasks like tick the correct box. 3. Beginning to speak, from imitative reproduction to autonomous production. Speaking is the one of the 4 skills which is different. The other 3 can be done alone, on one's own, without anyone else. Anyone can listen to the radio alone, read a book alone, and write a letter alone. But people do not usually speak alone. That is why it is so important to practice this skill at school. Conversation should take place with the teacher and other students. If the teacher asks a question, the pupils should feel motivated to answer. Every pupil should have the opportunity to speak as much as possible. That is a good reason to practice in pairs or groups with other students. Every pupil should be motivated to say as much as possible. Mistakes should not play an important part while speaking. The teacher should note them down and review them later, so as not to demotivate pupils. 3.1. Methodology to practice oral expression. The first stage of oral expression is the presentation stage, in which assimilation of the language used takes place and phonetic, structural, and lexical meaning are discovered. To do so, the ideal resource we can count on is the dialogue. In this stage, the teacher's role is extremely important because he must control as well the amount as the quality of the input. The next stage is usually called controlled practice. It is now that the pupils use the material presented in the previous stage in different situations. Basic structures to be used in this stage are questions formulated by the teacher or the pupils themselves. It is a good idea to use pictures as a context to provoke reactions and/or discussions, and graded drills to reinforce the pupil's acquisition. In this stage, the teacher mainly functions as a corrector. Directed and free production make up the creative stage. During directed production, the teacher decides on the context, situation, or function to be practiced. The activities are done with the teacher first, then in pairs or small groups. During free production, on the other hand, the students themselves choose the language to use in given situations, although the activities are similar to the ones in other stages. Now the teacher functions as an animator and assistant. 3.2. Imitative reproduction, stages 1 to 4. To practice imitative reproduction, we can use above all songs, chants, and poems to encourage pupils to mimic the model they hear on the cassette, CD, or from the teacher. This helps pupils to master the sounds, rhythms, and intonation of the English language through simple reproduction. Example 1. Pretty colors tune, Oh My Darling Clementine. Red and orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, brown, and pink and gray. Pretty colors are all around me, and I know each one by name. Procedures and tasks. Begin by singing slowly. Show a flashcard to match each color. Choose individual students who are mastering the song to show the correct flashcards. Give each student a flashcard. Each student must stand up when the class sings the color of his or her card. Place all the flashcards on the board. Ask various students to touch each color in the order the class sings them. Ask the students to stand up each time the class sings a color they are wearing, and to sit down each time the class sings a color they are not wearing. Ask the students to touch another student wearing the color being sung. Allow students to make color flashcards using crayons or paints and Bristol board. All students should show the correct color when the word is sung. Ask the students to touch classroom objects that are the color being sung. Example 2. Jazz chants. These songs or rhymes help non-native speakers learn the stress, rhythm, and intonation patterns by doing them. It is a very effective and enjoyable way to learn. They should be used with an accompanying CD, as it will provide the sense of timing and fun that must accompany them. Procedures used by the teacher when using a jazz chant. Be sure students know all the key vocabulary. Write the chant on the board. Read the entire chant to the class. Read one line at a time and have students repeat the line until they can say most of the words. Add the rhythm, clapping, marching, or playing a drum. Let the class do the rhythm and say it at the same time. Let single students say it while everyone else claps. Example 3. Poems. Winter, spring, summer, fall. I am short and I am tall. Faster, faster, up and down. Now sit down and touch the ground. Procedures. The children should be sitting in a circle. The teacher repeats the poem and actions a few times. Hopefully, some students will then follow. Actions. Winter, the students shiver. Spring, the students jump up in the air. Summer, the students wave their hands like a fan to cool themselves. Fall, the students sit down on the ground again. I am short. Sitting on the floor, they put their hands over their heads to indicate that they are short. And I am tall. They stand up again and make themselves as tall as possible. Faster, faster, up and down. They jump up and down as fast as they can. They can do this for a few seconds while they keep repeating up and down. Now sit down and touch the ground. They quickly sit down. The last student to touch the floor will have to answer a question. This poem can be used to start the class or get the energy back up after a long period of individual work. Teach or review the seasons. Teach or review simple descriptions, tall, short. Teach or review commands and action words, faster, sit down, touch. 3.3. Autonomous production, stages 5 and 6. To reach autonomous production, games and pair work activities are very advantageous. As games will be treated explicitly in topic 18, we will concentrate here on an example of pair work. Pair work should always be based on a given model to encourage the pupils to begin to manipulate the language by presenting them with a certain amount of choice, although within a fairly controlled situation. At the end of stage 6, students should be capable of expressing their ideas. However, they usually encounter problems when asking questions. This is due to a number of causes, i.e., usually the teachers are the ones who ask questions. The inversion of the auxiliary verb and subject can be especially difficult for many students. Our chosen example focuses specifically on the question form, helping students improve their speaking skill. Aim: to improve speaking confidence when using question forms. Task: intensive review of auxiliaries followed by gap question exercises. Procedures: hollow right pointing triangle. The teacher focuses on the auxiliary verb usage by making a number of statements in tenses the students are familiar with. He asks the students to identify the auxiliary verb in each case. Hollow right pointing triangle. The students are split up into pairs. Worksheets are distributed, and the students have to ask an appropriate question for the given answer. Worksheet: hollow right pointing triangle. The teacher controls the pupil's production by circulating through the pairs. Hollow right pointing triangle. The teacher hands out the second exercise, one for student A, the other for student B, and asks students to complete the gaps by asking their partner for the missing information. Pair work worksheets: ask questions to fill the gaps with the missing information. Student A: Frank was born in blank, where, in 1977. He went to school in Buenos Aires for blank, how long, before moving to Denver. He misses blank, what, but he enjoys studying and living in Denver. At the moment, he blank, what, at the University of Colorado, where he is going to receive his degree next blank, when? After he receives his degree, he is going to return to Buenos Aires to marry blank, who, and begin a career in art. Alice blank, what, at the university in Buenos Aires and is also going to receive blank, what, next May. They met in blank, where, in 1995 while they were on holiday together in the blank, where. Student B: Frank was born in Buenos Aires in blank, when. He went to school in blank, where for 12 years before moving to blank, where. He misses living in Buenos Aires but he enjoys blank, what, in Denver. At the moment, he is studying at the where he is going to receive his blank, what, next June. After he receives his degree, he is going to return to blank, where, to marry his fiancée Alice and begin a career in blank, what. Alice studies art history at the blank, where, and is also going to receive a degree in art history next, when. They met in Peru in, when, while they on holiday together in the Andes. Pupils reinforce question forms by practicing verb inversion with scrambled sentences using the various tenses. Scrambled questions. Put the words in order to form questions. The is German class. Is this the German class? 1. The teacher knew you are. 2. You from where are. 3. You spell how, name your do. 4. His name what's. 5. Rome from you are. 6. Telephone your what's number. 7. Wash car your did yesterday you. 8. Why Peter was last per week angry. 9. We'll meet when we. 10. What Sam doing tomorrow is. During this topic, we have analyzed the role of the two oral skills, oral comprehension and production, and we have addressed their development in the teaching of English as a foreign language. First, we have covered the most important features of both speaking skills and progress, from listening to more active and selective listening. In addition, we have investigated the process from imitate repetition to a more autonomous production. To conclude, we would like to mention some references that the curriculum establishes for oral language, concerned in Crown Decree 157 2022, Annex 2, Foreign Language Basic Knowledge. A. Communication. Introduction to Elementary Strategies for the Comprehension and Production of Brief, Simple, and Contextualized Oral, Written, and Multimodal Texts. Elementary contextual models in the comprehension and production of short and simple oral, written, and multimodal texts, such as congratulations, notes, lists, or notices. Elementary analog and digital tools for oral, written, and multimodal comprehension and production. 1. The oral English language. There are a lot of reasons for the importance of oral language. Human language is mainly oral. From the historic point of view, written language is secondary. A child learns to speak before it is sent to school, only then it acquires written language. Within human language, oral language is the daily, vital, and permanent means of communication. Great part of human communication is oral. Therefore, oral language has taken root in all statements of effective, social, and intellectual human life. The command of oral language is fundamental for the later acquisition of written language. Mistakes in oral communication, poverty of vocabulary, syntactic mistakes, or bad articulation will influence written expression. Characteristics of oral language. It is more complex to teach oral language than to teach written language, as we have to add the special difficulties of the oral code to the general ones. Aspects and development of oral language. According to Linfers, oral language is a complex system that relates sounds to meanings and is made up of three components: the phonological, the semantic, and the syntactic one. The phonological component involves the rules for combining sounds. The semantic component is made up of morphemes, the smallest units of meaning that may be combined with each other to make up words. The syntactic component consists of the rules that enable people to combine morphemes into sentences. 2. The complexity of the comprehension of the general meaning in oral interaction, from audition to active and selective listening. The aims of intensive oral comprehension are the acquisition of vocabulary, structures, and phonetics. This kind of practice is strictly controlled by the teacher, and it is indispensable to use adapted material. As far as the practice of extensive oral comprehension is concerned, we can state that the student alone discovers the meaning of the oral language he is exposed to. For that reason, there is less control from the teacher's side, and the global meaning is more important than each item. Listening involves two kinds of processing. Bottom-up processes are those that take in stimuli from the outside world, incoming speech signals, and top-down processes that uptake of information guided by the listener's prior knowledge and expectations. In most situations, bottom-up and top-down processes work together to ensure the accurate and rapid processing of information. If we want our listening to be effective, we should select the input sources carefully. Design the tasks creatively so that they are well structured. Teach our students effective listening strategies and integrate listening with the other skills. The language learner initially should encounter pre-listening exercises, generally topical questions that serve as advance for the listener. Next come listening exercises. While listening, the student answers questions to make multiple choice responses. After finishing the quiz or whatever task, the exercise will be corrected. Finally, post-listening exercises lead the learner to and through the social interaction phase, suggesting topics for further expansion and discussion, organizing paired dialogues, or recommending group activities for learners. Extensive and intensive listening. Extensive listening means that the listener understands a text globally, whereas intensive listening aims at details. Intensive listening involves listening for specific information, listening for the exact words of a phrase or expression, listening for details, listening to mimic a text. 3. Beginning to speak, from imitative reproduction to autonomous production. The first stage of oral expression is the presentation stage, in which assimilation of the language used takes place and phonetic, structural, and lexical meaning are discovered. To do so, the ideal resource we can count on is the dialogue. In this stage, the teacher's role is extremely important because he must control as well the amount as the quality of the input. The next stage is usually called controlled practice. It is now that the pupils use the material presented in the previous stage in different situations. Basic structures to be used in this stage are questions formulated by the teacher or the pupils themselves. It is a good idea to use pictures as a context to provoke reactions and/or discussions, and graded drills to reinforce the pupil's acquisition. In this stage, the teacher mainly functions as a corrector. During free production, on the other hand, the students themselves choose on the language to use in given situations, although the activities are similar to the ones in other stages. Now the teacher functions as an animator and assistant. Imitative reproduction, stages 1 to 4. To practice imitative reproduction, we can use above all songs, chants, and poems to encourage pupils to mimic the model they hear on the cassette, CD, or from the teacher. Autonomous production, stages 5 and 6. To reach autonomous production, games and pair work activities are very advantageous.